Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, 'cause that's what I am. I am a puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese content to help you level up your Japanese language skills. For today's grammar content, we're going to look at the ka pattern. It looks like this. This pattern is actually pretty easy to use and to understand. Basically, when you're using the ka pattern, you're marking some element of your sentence as kind of tenuous, or maybe you're not certain whether or not it's true. You might be offering up some kind of hesitancy about whether or not something is factual or whether or not something is going to happen. Let me provide you with a quick example. Right? So sometimes when we use this grammar pattern, we're going to connect two nouns, just like in this sentence. Puppy-sensei wa ii ka dou ka shirimasen.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
So, with this grammar pattern, what we're seeing is that the ka segment is standing in for the particle that we might expect to see in the subject particle slot in any kind of similar sentence, right? For instance, in a sentence where we have a certainty about Puppy-sensei's good girl status, we might see a sentence like the following, right? Puppy-sensei wa ii ko ga shirimasu. I know that Puppy-sensei is a good pup. Eh? Basically, in such a sentence, we're going to have something like noun, here Puppy-sensei, the topic marker, here wa, a new noun, a second noun, which connects to the first noun. So here we're using iko, which means like good girl, something like that. And then we have our subject marker ga, and then finally we have our verb, which here we're using shirimasu. Now, we're using that in the positive because this is a positive sentence. This sentence is, I know that Puppy-sensei is a good pup. And you all do know that, right? You do know that, don't you? Anyway, when we form a ka type of sentence, what we're going to need to do is to make two small changes to this structure, the structure of this I know Puppy-sensei is a good pup sentence. First, we're simply going to replace that subject particle ga with ka, which we've already defined as something like whether or not. However, we're also likely going to need to conjugate our verb as a negative too, right? And that's because in a ka sentence, more than likely we're expressing some degree of uncertainty about whether or not something is true. And so our best translation for that might be something like, I don't know whether or not something. Once we've made these changes, we land on a sentence like this. Puppy-sensei wa iko ka dou ka shirimasen. I just don't know. I don't know, y'all. What if I never know whether or not I'm a good dog? Now, in the case of a sentence like this, we've attached a noun to ka. We're basically creating a sentence that hesitantly remarks about a possible tenuous connection between two nouns, in this case, me and good pup. That's a perfectly valid use of the ka pattern, and it's really just simply connecting two nouns, exactly the same way we've done in the past with something like an x wa y des sentence, right? However, ka as a grammar pattern is incredibly versatile. We can use it with nouns, with verbs, and also with either e adjectives or with na adjectives. Let me show you a quick example using a verb. For sentences where a verb precedes ka, we're going to want to put that verb in the plain form, just like this sentence. Ame ga furu ka kakunin shimasu. This feels like a more complex sentence than the one that we saw previously, so I'm going to do the same thing for you that we did before and carefully deconstruct it, okay? So what we have here is the noun ame. That means rain. And then we have the subject marker ga, and then we have furu. Furu is a verb that means to fall, and it's often used with things like rain or snow. Remember, that verb is in the plain form here. In almost every case, verbs that come in the middle of a sentence are not going to carry any kind of tense marking or politeness marking. And so here, it's in the plain form so that it can take ka do ka, whether or not. And then our sentence finally ends with kakunin shimasu, which is a present tense polite verb meaning to check something or to confirm, right? And so basically this is a sentence that says, I'm going to confirm, kakunin shimasu, whether or not it's going to rain. Ame ga furu ka dou ka. Ne? Right? And so that whether or not segment is kind of like whether or not rain will fall. This is a pretty standard type of sentence when we're using the ka do ka pattern to describe whether or not a verb is going to happen or it's not going to happen. The verb in question, just like whether or not the rain will be falling in this example, is going to be in the plain form immediately before the ka do ka segment. And the verb at the end is probably going to indicate something about how you relate your knowledge to that uncertainty, whether or not it's going to happen. It might be, I need to check, or I'm worried about, or I'm concerned about, or I know, or I don't know. And that's why a lot of ka do ka sentences are going to end in something like, shirimasen, I don't know, or wakarimasen, I don't understand, or kakunin suru, I'm going to check. Now, lastly, we can also use this same grammar pattern with either type of adjective. In the case of a na adjective, na adjectives, as we already know, function like nouns. And so our first example that we showed before really covers the use of na adjectives too, because you can just place a na adjective in the place of that second noun and you're done, right? Whether or not it's going to be like this or not. Okay? But for an e adjective, it's actually pretty easy. You don't have to do much more than that. All you have to do is have the e adjective in the regular e form, right? Just the regular dictionary form that it would normally come in, just like using the plain form of the verb in our previous example, right? You just use the e adjective right before ka do ka to say, I don't know whether or not something is this way that I would describe it, right? So here's an example, right? その映画は怖いかどうか心配しています. That sentence means I'm worried about whether or not that movie is scary. So maybe you heard about some movie from your friend or something like that, and you don't know if that movie is scary or not, and so you're concerned about it. You have anxiety about whether or not the movie is going to be scary. Yeah? I chose this sentence because it displays a use of the e adjective with the ka do ka form. And that's fairly easy, right? You just have the adjective, in this case it's kowai, meaning scary, and it's in its simple base form, right? And this is exactly what we've come to expect based on our previous examples using plain verbs and nouns in the plain form. Yeah. However, when we have an e adjective, we might also have cases where we want that adjective to be in the past tense. And for those cases, we could also build a sentence like this one. テストの答えは正しかったかどうか知りません. That sentence means I don't know if my test answers were correct or not. To me, I find this sentence fascinating. And that's because the adjective is in the past tense. So our adjective here is tadashi. That's an e adjective meaning correct, right. Okay? And that's been conjugated to tadashikatta. Tadashikatta is the past tense form of the adjective tadashi, meaning correct. However, the overall tense of the sentence in this case is actually present tense. The verb is shirimasen, meaning I currently don't know. And that scopes over the entire sentence. So this is a present tense negative sentence, despite the fact that the adjective is in the past tense, because I right now don't know whether or not my test answers were correct. I find that really, really neat. I know that I nerd out about these things a little bit, but I think it's really cool that Japanese is able to have this really tenuous, variable grasp over tense in some respects, and that allows us to have sentences that basically translate to I currently am in the state of not knowing if my past test answers were correct or not. I think that's really, really cool. Is it weird that I find that kind of thing cool? I don't know. Anyway, that's about all for kaどうか. It's a fairly easy little grammar point to use, but I think it's really handy. Anyway, please always let me know if you have questions or not, or if there are additional points that you need to clarify or not. You can tell me. Whether or not you learned a lot today, I know that I'll be looking forward to seeing you next week. また来週